Over the last 25 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing and highlighting some truly interesting people. Everyone who is anyone, both the famous and the infamous, from presidents and their first ladies to kings and queens, movie stars and pop stars, captains of industry, heads of state, sports personalities, innovative entrepreneurs, and some pretty fascinating everyday people. Today, I'm proud to introduce you to Andrew Miller, a former Attorney General of the state of Virginia, whose career has been committed to settling legal controversies in a civil manner with a dedication to the rule of law. Mr. Miller, it is indeed a pleasure and an honor to speak to such a distinguished colleague, sir.
The one thing you haven't said, Star, is whether you put me in the category of the famous or the infamous.
Well, as a former attorney general, sir, something tells me that you could fit into both of those categories at any given time. Just depends on the day. You know what I'm saying?
You're bad.
Listen, I'm a Southern lady like you're a Southern gentleman, and we know each other, okay?
That's right. Exactly.
So, sir, let's start with what made you first decide to pursue a career in law?
I was in the Army with the 7th Division in Korea. And I noticed one day this Korean gentleman was coming into our battery area. And normally we didn't allow anybody other than troops in the area, of course. And so we checked him out, and we determined he was a lawyer trying to contact a client in the battery area. And I said, well, you're spending 16 months here in Korea. Maybe you might go down to Seoul and see whether the LSAT is giving a test there. The LSAT, of course, as you know, being the law school aptitude test. And so one day a sergeant and I went down to Seoul. It was in the wintertime. We were greeted at the door of the school by a Korean professor dressed in white right out of central casting. And he had been told by LSAT that Americans wished to be warm when they took an examination. So he had put these hibashis, which are charcoal burning stoves, down the center aisle. Well, I started taking the exam and I looked across, and the guy across the aisle from me had passed out. And true story. And I said, Miller, do you really want to go to law school? So I beat a hasty retreat on that. Out of the school, the ambulances arrived to take care of those who'd been overcome by the carbon dioxide, monoxide. And so I went back in the summertime. Next, there was no need for abashis, and I took the test. And that very counterintuitively was my introduction to the law.
You almost burned up for it, okay?
That's right.
Yeah. So, sir, that's a very interesting way to begin in our field of the law. But why don't you take us through your progression in the field, because it is quite amazing from your early days after the military as an associate to your eventual partnership, and then just some of the accolades leading up to your retirement, sir.
Well, that's a lot of history and a very succinct statement. But basically, I started practicing law in what we Virginians call Southwest Virginia, which is that area of Virginia west of Roanoke, in a little town of 4,500, maybe slightly larger than your little town. I don't know. But in any event, I started practicing there with two other lawyers who'd recruited me from University of Virginia Law School. And I tried cases all over the western part of that area, west of Roanoke. And then in 1968, I'd been out of law school 8 years, and the Attorney General of Virginia said he wasn't going to run again. So I decided, well, I would go ahead and throw my hat in the ring. And there was a primary and then a runoff primary, and I was the nominee, and I was elected Attorney General.
Wow.
I served almost 2 full terms. I ran in 1977 in a Democratic primary for governor and lost. And then the next year, I got the Democratic nomination for the U.S. Senate against John Warner and Elizabeth Taylor. So, unfortunately, I like John a lot, and we're friends. It was a very, compared to certain recent campaigns, a very positive campaign. He won by 0.4%. And as a result, I decided I would move to Washington and practice law from there, which I did until I retired.
Well, sir, share with me during your active tenure as an attorney, what areas should I say, was your legal specialty?
Well, because of my background as Attorney General, I had a pretty good understanding, if I may say so, of the relationship between state government and economic activity and civil rights activity and all sorts of other activities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And because of that, I naturally gravitated to an organization called the National Association of Attorneys General. And I went to all of those meetings. I knew at the time all of the state attorneys general. And therefore, when individuals or corporations had issues with state government, I would be retained to represent them. And on the other side of the table, normally was an incumbent attorney general. So that network was very helpful in terms of being able to make sure that a client's point of view was fully understood.
How have you, because you started the law for all practical purposes as a public servant, how have you reached out to connect to, say, the law enforcement community, because they too are public servants?
No question about it. And I personally have been very distressed by the adverse publicity in much of the media with respect to law enforcement. And in some instances, the Commonwealth's attorney, or in many states, the district attorney, have, in my view, made mistakes in terms of the handling of such cases. An example of where that has not occurred is in Kenosha, where the district attorney has decided not to bring charges, but everybody makes mistakes. And I readily appreciate that on occasion, particularly in light of the stress that they're under, police make mistakes. And if they make mistakes, then that has to be looked at from the standpoint of the rule of law. If laws have been broken, then justice needs to be done. And I have no problem with that at all. I have been so concerned, though, about law enforcement officers being unfairly smeared that I have made contributions, not large contributions, but nonetheless contributions to a number of organizations like the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, which has an incredible record of representing officers who are charged and having those officers acquitted or the case dismissed. So you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And I would like to think that some of this mob mentality would cease, and states, particularly where here in Washington, D.C., you have a mayor of African-American descent. You have a city council overwhelmingly African-American. There's no reason for the African-American community to be upset at their government. They need to talk to their government and get things straight if the police aren't acting right. So I'm somewhat frustrated in that regard, but I'm doing what I can as a private citizen.
You know, it's so interesting that you say that. I have been very much involved in efforts at criminal justice reform over the last few years. And one of the things that I've noticed in all aspects of criminal justice reform, law enforcement is a necessary part of our community. We cannot exist without it. Obviously, we're a nation of laws. And sir, what law enforcement requires, it requires a relationship with the community. There is no question about that. You are never going to have effective law enforcement without there being give and take from both the law enforcement side and the community side, because law
I
enforcement
agree with that
there,
100%.
law enforcement is there to support the community, and the community is there to support law enforcement. And I just think that if we can get back to not alienating one side or the other, but incorporating both sides, I think that is where true criminal justice reform lies. That's just my very humble opinion, having been doing this kind of work for many years also. What is, in your opinion, let's move out of the criminal justice area to the civil litigation area. What, in your opinion, is the greatest benefit of civil litigation in our country?
Well, let me start by saying, I think we're too litigious a society. If everybody that has a problem about anything says, I'm going to take it to court or take you to court.
That's
whatever. Having said that, civil litigation is a mechanism. If you and your neighbor, for example, get in a fight over the line between your two properties, there are two ways to handle it. Either one, you duke it out, and the other, you go to court. Yeah. And going to court is undoubtedly the appropriate way to handle those disputes. Yes, the court will probably appoint a special master, a surveyor, to run the line and to establish it from the records in the clerk's office. And then the dispute ought to end, period, and nobody gets hurt.
You have been very involved in all aspects of the law for your entire career. Tell me what has been the most rewarding part of this?
I think being Attorney General.
Yes, sir.
Because the Attorney General, you represent literally all the agencies of the state government. Health, education, human services. I could obviously go on. Yes. And so from time to time, the people who are the directors of those departments obviously have legal issues. And where do they turn? They turn to the Attorney General's office. And I was very fortunate as Attorney General, and some of the people I was able to attract to the office. I know you'll get a laugh out of this, but I attracted the first female assistant attorneys general to the office. And very importantly, I attracted the first African Americans to the office. And so you had quite a change in atmosphere. The African American I attracted, he was a graduate of Harvard Law School. Nobody could question his credentials. And the women were generally wives of attorneys whom they had met in law school and married, had children, and then wanted to get into the practice of law. And they were all, everybody I mentioned, extremely able. And I was fortunate enough to be recognized by NAG, the National Association, for the work of the office in 1976 with the Kelly Wyman Award.
Well, that is wonderful. And congratulations to you over a long and distinguished career in our profession. Ms. Miller, one last thing. What's the one thing that you'd like the viewer of this video feature to walk away with?
If I had my druthers, as we used to say down in Abington, it would be that people better understand why the rule of law is so important. Everybody needs to obey the rule of law, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. If you disagree with it, well, then do something about it.
Yes, sir.
But you don't just walk away and saying to everybody who will listen that you're not going to obey the rule of law. That is a terrible instinct in the body politic.
Mr. Miller, I think you have actually eloquently said summarized really and truly one of my favorite quotes, and it happens to be from General Dwight Eisenhower. The clearest way to show what the rule of law means to us in everyday life is to recall what has happened when there is no rule of law. And so I think General Eisenhower laid it right on the line with that quote.
Yes, he did. I couldn't agree with you more. My father was a colonel on the Eisenhower staff, and so I've always been a great admirer of his.
And he laid it right out there for us to see. You have really done a service for our country, and we certainly do appreciate it. Thank you for your time today, sir, and thank you very much for your insight on what the law means to you.
Well, you have a wonderful smile, if I may say so, and I wish you great success in the future.
So do I. Thank you very much. You got a long future ahead.